So the first thing you can first I'm going to go to the docs for this. But it's pretty simple. So this is the URL, the base URL, and then you'd attach the following to the end. So if you wanted one item, it'd be /item/ID. So for example, for this exact item, they have an example of it. This is the JSON response that you would get. So it looks like every item has a time that it's posted, and this is in seconds, so you can convert that pretty easily. A title, the type, right, where actually the URL is, so you can direct your user to open something up in a new tab. Its score, so how many like upvotes it has. It's interesting. They call them kids here, which is cute. And then it's children's stories, right? So if people have posted comments, I think that's what they refer to. Okay, cool. But I want to be able to build the actual like listing of all the stories. So how would we get that? Is this a comment as users data? Okay, so here they have a new top and best stories. Up to 500 top and new stories are at VO/top stories and news stories. Best stories, so you could also do best, which they may do based on rank, I'm not sure. But this is what you would call. So what kind of data structure is this? An array. Does anybody know what these are? Yes, they're IDs, right? So this doesn't give us a ton of information, right? This one ID, if you saw that, like as a developer, you'd be like, I don't know what that ID is. But if you look at their API, how you can get information on that story ID is you can do -item and then that story ID. Does that make sense? So you have to make one call for all of the list of IDs, and then for each of those IDs, I'm going to make an additional call to get information. So thinking about what I just said, if I want to make a call for each of these IDs, what method do you guys think I would use? For each? Yeah, that sounds pretty good, right? If I got, the top 50 stories, then I want to display those to the user. The user doesn't care about a story ID, right? But the user cares about the story title and link and votes. So for each of these, I'd call my item call. Okay, so that's what we're going to build. So let's do top stories. They're nice enough to give you the API, so that's kind of cool. But, so now I know where I'm actually calling, and then I'd go to the docs, do API, I think it's fetch or Ajax. It used to be fetch in the docs, but I think now they put it under Ajax, which is fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this in component did mount. I'm just going to take their example. So I don't really have to worry about syntax. I'm just going to plug in my information. And why do I do this in component, and why do I make this call in component did mount and not in something like render? Does anybody know why? Somebody look up component did mount and tell me why I'm doing it and why I'm making a network call in component did mount. All right, while you guys are looking that up, and I'll ask you in just a second, all I did was paste in the URL that I'm going to use. I don't need this quite yet to set the state, so I'm just going to comment that out, and I'm just going to console log this. Spell render wrong. I'm just going to console log my return of the call, just so we can see it. Why am I calling my fetch? Why am I calling my network calls and my component did mount? Why is it the best place? Yes. You can look on the React docs and look up component did mount. Yes, right? So it's right after the component mounts. Yes, something else?
Yeah, it's not too early so that everything else can load.
Right. So your user's not going to see the intermediate state of there being nothing on the page and then there being maybe like, you know, an empty paragraph tag and then there all of a sudden being a ton of data. Why wouldn't I call this in my render function? Yeah. And what happens if I set state in my render function? What happens? Why? Yeah, it'll keep on re-rendering. So when you guys make network calls, there are two places that you can do them. In a user event or a component lifecycle event, like component did mount. Pretty much it's going to be component did mount or when a user interacts with the page. There are other ones that you could theoretically do, but React suggests component did mount. So best practice, just do your on-load calls here. Okay, so someone explain to me what fetch does, or an AJAX call. What does fetch do? Come on. Look it up if you don't know. Don't just look at me. I'm not going to tell you. Yeah.
Goes out to that URL to get the data.
Yes. So it goes out to this URL and it gets data from it. So this URL, right, what is that connected to? Who's setting up that URL? Everything. Yeah, the API, which is connected to some sort of what? Yeah, database, right? So this is our connection to the database. So the back end is going to set up this route, and we're going to make a call to this route to get information from the database. Okay? What we have here is called a promise. You don't need to worry about what this means so much as like right now I would just copy and paste React's example, change the URL, and then change what you're going to do with the result. But what a promise does is it says once you're done getting this data, then turn it into JSON. So that means turn it in to something that your JavaScript program can read. Then you're going to take the result of that, .then, it's pretty self-explanatory, and then you're going to do something with it. Right here, after you turn it to JSON, is where you can set it in the state, do things like that. Okay, does anybody have any questions about this? Cool. Yes?
The result in the second then,
Uh-huh.
is that referring to the res.json?
Yes, it's just the result. It's whatever is returned here is result. You could call it pizza. It's just a stand-in. Usually you'll see result, response is standard. It doesn't really matter. If you wanted to get super specific for future devs to help them out, I'd maybe do story IDs. Like be specific about what's being returned because that's what I'm expecting, right? An array of story IDs. Doesn't necessarily matter though. It's kind of preference, but we'll leave it as result for now. Okay, so I'm going to start my app. I don't think I'm running anything. Come on. Oh, bummer. Oh, my bad. All right, so we start my app. Here we go. All I have right now on the page is just like an H2. But if you want to see your network calls, see them in a couple places. So network is where you're going to see them. I like to filter by HXR. These are going to be your actual AJAX calls. So here is my first one, right? This is where I requested on my fetch. It's the URL. Pretty. These are the parameters that I'm calling. For a get, your parameters are going to be in your URL. So if I did print, I don't know, there are other options. I could do print is equal to ugly, right? Preview will give you a nice preview that you can dig into, similar to if you were doing this in the console. But if you wanted to view your actual response, you could always go here. Okay, so here's my response. Does this look good? This is what we're expecting. What's the data structure here again? An array of IDs, right? And here you can look at your status code. Green is good, 200 is great. Okay, so now I have an array. If I go to my console log, right, I'm console logged my result. So here all I did was just console log it. So now we have all of these IDs, but that doesn't matter. Like, what do we want to do with each one of these IDs? What do we want to do with them? We want to get their information, right? We don't want to. Do you want to show this to your user? Like, what are they going to do with this? These are a lot of IDs, right? These are a ton. I think they're 418. What I would do first is go to the docs and see if there's a way to pass through a parameter that would limit the number back. Why would I look for a parameter to limit the number back? Does anybody know why? Yeah. Right. And what, as a user, how does that impact your experience? Speed, right? If it takes 2 seconds to load 418, imagine the short of time to load 20, right? So a lot of times what it's called on the front end is pagination. You'll tell the back end, load 1 through 20 items right now, get super fast on the page. If the user wants to look at more, they'll load more, right? Same thing with Gmail. You don't have all your emails since the dawn of time. That would take forever. All they do is show you like your most recent 50. Same thing. So the first thing, let's actually look at their API and just make sure. So it doesn't. It doesn't look like they have. Yeah, it doesn't look like they have like a pagination. So that's okay. But I don't want to show the user 500 items on a page. Typically, best UX practice is to limit scrolling as much as possible unless a user wants to continue. So, if I just want to loop through the first, I don't know, let's do like Reddit does, 20 items. What's a good way for me to just get an array of those first 20 items? Think of your array methods, how you would do that. I have an array of IDs, but I just want the first 20. Slice. Awesome. Why? What does slice return? A what? Shallow copy, right? And you have a start and a stop. So it seems like a good method to use. And like, guys, a lot of this is why array methods are so important, because you're going to use them all the time, right? I know I need to cut. And if you don't remember slice, look it up. Say array method, and I would say need first 20 items in an array or something like that. I bet somebody's asked you. Yeah, here we go. How to get first n number of elements from an array. Boom, they use slice. So that's what we're going to use. So if you don't remember exactly the method, look it up. Okay, so I'm going to do result.slice. And then remember, slice, you have start and stop. So I'm going to start at index 0, and let's stop at index 21. Oops. And just to make sure I know what that looks like, I'm just going to console log it. I console log everything. Every step of the way, I console log because I want to know without a shadow of a doubt that every line of code is proven, so I don't have to spend hours tracking through my code. Okay, so that's 21, so I should have stopped at 20. It's okay, that's why we console log. All right. Okay, cool. Now I have 20 items in the array. Okay, now for each of these items, I want to make another call. So, what method did we decide we were going to use? For each, right? Perfect. And for each, my callback has some arguments. What's the first thing I have access to? Item, yep. And then index, cool. You don't really need index here, but just as a refresher. Okay, now for each of these items, I want to make another call. But just to make sure we're getting the right item and what item looks like, I'm going to console log it. Oh, thank you. Okay. Okay, so here I'm console logging in my for each. These are each of my IDs. For every one of these IDs, I want to make another fetch call. So, go back here. I'm just going to copy their syntax. And inside of the for each is where I'm going to actually make this fetch call. Okay, and I'm not going to do it at this URL. I'm going to go back to the docs and find out the actual URL that I'm going to go to. I have way too many open tabs. Okay. So for the item, I think that was the first thing we looked at. So it's just the same prefix / item / the ID. So like for instance, this is our example one. So it's this URL, and this would be the dynamic part. So I'm just going to take that. But instead of this fetch, I'm going to put it here. But for every item, I don't want information on ID 88363, right? I want information on each of the story IDs. So instead of calling it item, I'm actually going to call it story ID. And then to make the URL, I'm going to use template literals. You've seen me use it a couple times before. So instead of this, I'm going to tell it JSON's coming, or sorry, JavaScript's coming. Let's get $, curly brackets, and then pass in here. So now I have a string, and for every story, I'm going to call. I'm basically just going to call information on it. I'm going to get rid of this. And we'll go over errors in just a second, but I want you guys to see what the result is. Actually, I'm not calling this for every story. How many stories am I calling this for? Just 20, right? That's another reason I'd want to limit this, because if there was 418, that would mean for 418 IDs, I'd make an additional call to get information. That slows down, right? Okay, let's see what we're getting for every story. Okay, cool. Now, for every story, I'm getting some information, right? Does this look like more information, more of the information that you would want to pass to your user? Yeah, right? I have a title, a type, a URL, right? So you could make your target underscore whatever and open in a new tab if you wanted, who it's by, etc. What kind of data structure are each one of these? Objects, right? Okay, cool. So these are objects. So if I wanted to access the title of this, how would I access it? Yeah, just the name of the object if it was like obj.title. Cool. Okay, so right now I have all these objects, right? I'm making these calls, I'm getting this information, but what's the end goal here? What do I want to do with this information? I want to display it, right? Ideally, I want to display it. I'm using React. So somehow I need to store this somewhere where my component can read it and maybe add new things to it. So where's a good place for me to store these stories, this information? State, right? Great place for me to store. That way, if my user says load 20 more, I could load 20 more, push it into some array in the state, and I could keep adding or taking away. How the example one had hide, right? You guys know how to take an item out of an array. Same exact thing. So let's store it in the state. So we're going to make a state. Remember, state's just an object. And I would just store this in like maybe stories. And an array seems best to me. Do you have to do an array? What's another option you could store these stories in? An object. You could do it with an object, right? You could maybe do the key is the ID, the value could be the rest of the object if you wanted to. To me, whenever I see information listed on a page in a particular order, that screams array to me. Most of the time, you want to let the backend be in charge of ordering things. So I'm going to choose an array. Okay, so looking at here, we have a bunch of objects, right? How would I get each one of these objects into my array? What's a good way to get an item into an array? Push, right? Okay, cool. So I need to get it in this state, so this is a little bit of a cheater, but what's the method I'm going to use to get it into this state? This .set state. Okay. So just so we're in line with JavaScript immutability, what I would first do is make a shallow copy of my stories. So I'd call this maybe new stories, or you could call it stories, it's fine. You could do this a couple different ways. I like to do map and just return the story, just like I showed you guys last time, a couple times ago. The other option, if you like this doesn't make sense to you, you can do this.state.stories.slice, and that'll make a shallow copy of the whole thing. Either one is fine. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to make a shallow copy of stories, and then we said we're going to push the item to it, right? So I'm just going to do stories.push. And instead of result, I'm actually going to call this story, just because I'm having two results here, and it's not really great practice to use the same one over again. So I just push story, call that story, push it, and now I got to set this state. They already have it here, so might as well. And then stories. The reason I comment out what React wants to set this state to is because if you leave there this.set state, like here result may not have a part called items. Result could be an array. So I always take out there this.set state, just because that could cause errors. So React gives you a little note about catching errors, but let's make sure this works. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about errors. So if you look at our network calls, how many story calls am I calling? 20, right? I'm calling one for every story ID, well, one for every of the first 20 story IDs. You could say this is what I'm calling. It's a preview. Okay, and then if I go to my React app, Go to Hacker News. Now, stories are in my state. Okay? So this is nice, right? Now, I could probably loop through this and render some components to show my user, right? So it's in the state. Does anybody have any questions about what I've done so far? Okay. Now, not all the time will you have something where you have to do multiple calls. It's going to depend on the backend, what they're giving you. Are they giving you an array of IDs? Are they just giving you the information and objects? It depends. When you guys start writing the backend in advance, you're going to see the different ways to create your databases and your API calls, and you're going to get to decide the best way to write APIs. I always like working with backend developers that have written on the front end because they know the headaches that we have, because this is a headache to me. If I was the backend developer who did this, I wouldn't do it by ID like this, but comes with time. Maybe they have a reason behind. Okay, the reason they want you to handle errors here and handle errors, so then, like I said, this is a promise, but then it has two parentheses, so then is a what? What type of data is then? If you see parentheses, what should you think? Function. Then is just a function. When you get the result of this, then do this block of code. You pass it two arguments, two functions actually. First is success, right? Your promise returns success. This is what you're going to do if it's a successful code. It's nice to be able to handle errors because you might get them, right? The backend, the route may not exist anymore. You get a 500 error. You could get a weird error, right? They may have made their own errors and they're rejecting your call. You want to handle that because you want to tell the user. I hate when I come to a page and just see like a spinning wheel. It's the most frustrating thing because you don't know what's wrong. So it's nice to tell the user, hey, this is your error. Invalid login, right? My favorite on the IRS website is it's just down, but at least you know. So you can handle it too, right? Here, this is where you handle errors. Is it crucial? No, but when you do this, especially in like technical interviews, this looks really good. This means that you're thinking about your end user and their experience. Because this is ideal, but it may not. Anybody have any questions about this? Okay, all of the code for this is in your pre-work. I can also copy and paste what I have here, but so here I've gotten it to the state for you. Okay, so what you guys are going to do in your groups is you are going to get it on the page. I'm going to stop recording this.